Welcome to the Arena Decklist Podcast. I'm Gerry Thompson, joined by Bryan Gottlieb. And as I was saying that, I was picturing in my mind what it would sound like if we did actually do a rebrand and what I was supposed to be saying. I forgot what the Fab one was supposed to be.
Yeah, it's something cult related.
Yeah.
Fab Doctrination or something like that. I don't remember.
Anyway, so someone suggested the GG podcast, which would use a similar model to the game podcast, which was Gerry, Andrew, Michael, and this one could be Gerry and Gottlieb. And it's like, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's weird. People don't know this, but we spent hundreds of hours trying to do our rebrand. Yeah,
way too much time. The problem with it is that I'm bad at that kind of stuff. If you gave me multiple choice,
yeah,
I'll crush it, right? But then it was I have to pick a thing myself. And I asked some people because I know that I'm weak in this area, no one ever suggested GG. But I also think that then we would have to do a lot of stuff with SEO and making sure that, I'm sure there are just 100 of those podcasts out there already.
Yeah,
right? So,
that's true. Also, I remember we were looking at .gg domains. So would we have been gg.gg?
Podcast.gg. I don't know.
Yeah, that's weird.
Anyway, still thinking about it. It's we just shipped a bunch of merch too. It's just come on. I don't know. Might ironically be stuck with this silly name.
I think so. I've mostly given up on the idea of rebranding because I look at us as almost a legacy service now. The people who are still here, still with us, it's just they've been with us for a long time. They like us. They have subscribed to our particular brand of bullshit. And part of our brand of bullshit is that we have a podcast name that is in no way related to what we talk about. And we'll keep that rolling this week, by the way, as we talk about Pioneer, a format that is not on Arena, and ignore the various...
Getting closer.
It's getting closer. It's getting closer. And ignore the various Arena offerings, be it made-up sealed formats or made-up constructed formats. Just will not be touching on those. Instead, doing a little paper talk with Pioneer.
Yeah, and looking at Magic Online deck lists, perhaps.
Right.
So, big game. I already won an RCQ. I have attended a few RCQs. I'm attending another RCQ this weekend. We have established that I cannot play in them, so yes. I'm kind of chilling. The last weekend, Josh Cho played some Pioneer, so we had to work on that a little bit, and then I was just kind of being the chauffeur, and it gave me a reason to actually go get my car fixed, get my air conditioner fixed, because if I'm going to be chauffeuring, I need my person to be comfortable, right? Yep. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, but first I know that you played in a Pioneer RCQ and kind of want to talk about that a little bit more and hear about what you have going on in the future. But first, I guess we have a clarification because we both kind of blew it.
Yeah, well, everyone involved blew it. We spent a lot of time last week talking about my Pioneer RCQ where I played Lotus Field, lost in the top 8 to Mono Green, and talked a bunch about a situation in the top 8 where I was planning a turn and I had to answer a Damping Sphere, and I was trying to play around recursive abilities, particularly the backside of Pestilent Cauldron and the sorcery on the back of it, Restorative Burst. Turns out that card can't get Damping Sphere back. It did in my matchup. And as I mentioned, I was playing a friend of mine, and we spoke about this afterwards. He was as confused as I was. Mentally, I had shortcutted this card to just double regrowth.
And in that deck, it mostly does do that.
Right. For sure. With this big exception that completely changes the game. I mean, I easily win the game too. Any turn where Damping Sphere was not in play, I had all the tools to go off. So blew this one. This is one where I talked a bit in our Discord afterwards, where it's very easy to be oh, it's not fair. I could have won this tournament and it wasn't justified. But I just look at this as no, I didn't deserve to win. I didn't know what the cards in the format did.
Yeah, it's a thing that you could have known,
right?
And didn't.
And that's part of the game. You talked a lot last week about administration of game state, right? And keeping the game clean, and part of that is knowing what the cards do. And I failed at that. And that's just based on repetition. Had I played a bunch on the mono green side, maybe at some point I realize what this card can actually do. So I only have myself to blame as I see it. I don't really feel like I was robbed or that I deserved a better result. I think I got exactly the result that was justified for not knowing how these cards work. But you said something that I thought was like really funny. And keep in mind, as I tell the story, this is in no way me like trying to deflect blame. I promise I have taken all the blame on myself. I am the reason why I did not succeed in this spot. But it is funny that I lost to a tutorable artifact with 3 activated abilities on its front side and an entire full-length sorcery on its backside because I didn't know my land, which destroys artifacts, was being used improperly. And obviously this planeswalker that can tutor on every single turn was just able to find this very niche answer. And it's just like a very good illustration of not just like jumping one shark, but just jumping as many sharks as possible as far as like what the types of cards, like what cards are capable of for their types.
Yeah, it's just like, come on, dude, you didn't know this? Like,
I,
what the hell?
I didn't. But like I said, I should have. Like that's part of being
No,
a good Magic player at this point.
I'm being facetious, man. It's okay. We did an entire podcast where we're talking about it, right? And I know that there's hundreds, maybe thousands of people who are listening to it, like pulling their hair out. Like,
Oh yeah,
when are
for
these
sure.
idiots going to figure out that this is not? We talked about it for 20 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. Eventually, us idiots came around and pieced it together. But yeah, a funny way to start off my PTQ season for sure, and one that's both a lesson and like a weird summation of where Magic design is at this moment.
Should have played around it.
Should have
I
played
guess.
around it. Yep, that. I mean, that sums it up, right? Should have played around it.
I mean, could have, in theory, played around it. Yeah, if you're playing an absolute ton, and obviously some of that is on your opponent, but it's even funnier, right? That it's your opponent didn't know, and they're the one who's playing the deck.
Yeah. It was my cards too. Like I handed my opponent these cards so he could play them for the first time in this tournament. So he didn't know what the cards did either.
Yeah.
And like was shortcutting the same exact way I was. And when we actually like did the thing, nobody took restorative burst out of the sleeve and like flipped it over to look at the backside. So
Okay.
yeah, it is what it is.
Interesting. Yeah, because I guess you cast it and then it goes to the graveyard but gets exiled instead.
Yep.
So then it ends up back as the cauldron anyway. So why would you even flip it over?
Yeah, who cares? It'll all sort itself out.
Yeah. Well, with that out of the way, do you still like Lotus Field? Would you still play it? Do you have any Pioneer stuff coming up? What do you have coming up?
I don't have anything until Modern Tournament next month. That's the next thing on my schedule.
Ooh.
Yeah, so I have a few things going on. You know, I have a Flesh and Blood tournament this weekend, and then I head to France for the Pro Tour. So a lot of stuff going on, keeping me busy on that end. But I am excited to like have a little time to figure out Modern before that comes around. You know, probably just play the best deck. I'll play your deck. I'll trust you. I think you have this one figured out. So any tweaks that you have going on that, I'll make, and I'll be a 4-color grinder. I'll even shuffle up the full 80 cards, man. I'll do the work. I'll figure it out, and I'll mash them together in a nice big pile. And they're probably going to have to be double sleeved. So we'll work through it though. I'll burp them. You know the burping process where you put them down and you give them like that CPR maneuver where you kind of pump on them a little bit, and then I'll put some heavy books on top, and we'll do it all.
Yep.
We'll make it work.
Yep. Hate it.
Yep.
I mean, alternatively, I could just mail you my deck, which is single sleeved, and
I guess actually there's like time for that. Like part of the reason why I've never really considered that is because I don't want it to be like a rush thing and, you know, make you run to the post office and get it here. But if I know I'm not playing until September, maybe I actually will take you up on that. Maybe that's the best way to handle this.
No, because my executive dysfunction only responds to panic and deadline. So you give me a couple weeks, it's like those weeks don't exist.
Yeah. All right. We'll check back in on this about a week before.
We'll figure it out. So played some Pioneer last week. Josh is going to play some Modern this week. And I think we figured out a thing for that. I don't know if it's better for... I think you should just play Elementals probably.
Okay.
but I think he figured out like a different thing that might be good. So we'll see how that goes. I'm not going to talk about that, but I will talk about the Pioneer work that we did last week.
Cool. I'm excited to hear about that because that is where my focus has been thus far, and I think the format is moving some interesting places. I may have skipped your question. You asked if I still liked Lotus Field at some
Oh
point.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I do. I just like there's no reason not to really. Like the metagame is not super hostile against it. You get to just like dodge a lot of the nonsense that's going on. I don't feel like you have staunchly unfavorable matchups, and you do have some very favorable matchups if you know how to play them. Things like control feel extremely easy to me. I just think they're almost laughable. The control players will tell you the opposite side of that, by the way, but I just don't see it. I think you just kind of set up and eventually you draw your thought distortion and you just fine and get to do whatever you want. So
Yeah. In the meantime, they try and kill you with like a 1/1 sharp
Wandering
typhoon and a
Emperor, yeah,
wandering emperor. Yeah.
yeah, and it doesn't do anything, and it just feels totally fine on that side. So I think that series of matchup is good. If there's like a really miserable matchup, it's like the spirits type stuff.
Yep.
Like mono blue spirits is really gross from the Lotus Field side, but there's not a ton of that floating around, and I think on the whole, I'd be pretty happy registering Lotus Field again. So
Spirits floating around.
yeah, you like that?
Yeah, yeah, that's great. My take on what people were going to be doing in Pioneer was certainly informed by the internet and whatnot, but a lot of it too was playing the modern RCQs and hearing what had happened to people in their Pioneer RCQs.
Interesting.
And it's still so weird. Again, playing in like Northern Virginia, Southern Maryland, stuff like that, and there's so many stores in the area, and at this point, I mean, like Josh used to play in like some IQs and had local store owners that he was friends with and stuff. So like I feel like he's been to a bunch of the stores, but then we just keep finding these places that have RCQs and we go to them. It's like, oh yeah, this store is like hella nice. It just turns out that they're just like a bunch of very good stores in the area and also a bunch of RCQs for people to play in. And there's been some overlap for the players at each event, but definitely not 100%, you know?
Yeah.
So it's not even like there's, this like regional Nova metagame or anything. So it's still, pretty hard to pin down. Shouldn't be making any hard reads. But I was making kind of a hard read because kind of everything I heard fell under the same umbrella, which was just there's a lot of creature decks.
Mm.
So a lot of humans, a lot of spirits, some mono green, and then there are things like Phoenix, the occasional control deck have still to this day not seen a Lotus Field, which is weird. I feel like if people just want to do the U thing and like learn the deck, then they'll probably do pretty well. But
It's mind blowing to me. It
yeah,
really like I don't know how you could ever shuffle up the deck and play it and just be like, no, this can't hang in the format.
because
It
it's
makes no
annoying.
sense.
It's annoying.
It is annoying. It is. It's a silly deck to have exist, but usually when silly decks exist, there's something to be said for them, and I don't think this is an exception.
Yeah, like KCI was around
Yeah,
for a
for a
very
long
long
time.
time,
Yep.
and it was just like, oh, it's a deck that Canister and Matt Nass play or whatever, and then it's just like, oh god, ban this, it's
Yeah.
busted, just get it
Yeah.
out of here. I'm not saying that Lotus Field is the same, but it's having
There's similarities there for sure.
it's the same kind of effect where people are just like, I'm not going to pick it up.
Yep. I agree. And maybe it'll take that like one more print to just be like, oh, this is undeniable now. And then everyone plays it. But I think there was Lear, honestly. I really do. Like I just think that was the thing that completely opened this deck up.
Yeah, I believe that, but I don't know. I'm an expert. I don't know what the fourth side of various cards does
True.
specifically.
That is
And
true. Yeah, how can I say anything? I don't even know the format. I don't know what the backside of that card does. So
yep, and I don't know. Lotus Field has a lot of those cards where it's just they should have a scroll bar in the text, right? But they don't. So
yep.
anyway, thought about the creature thing and what to do, and I think that there's a lot of different ways you could go about it. Where well, it probably means that Spirit is not great. You're going to have some very polarizing matchups, and something like Phoenix is good against some of the creature decks, but not all of them.
Mm-hmm.
You could make the argument that mono green potentially goes over the top of the creature decks, and you have some pretty big walls to get in the way of their stuff and whatnot. So there are a lot of different ways you could take it, but the thing that I liked doing and thought would be really good was taking Rakdos Sacrifice and then going a little bit more creature heavy with Priest of Forgotten Gods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked a bunch over the last few weeks about how Priest of the Forgotten Gods could potentially slot into this format. So cool. I'm not super shocked to hear that.
Yeah, Josh lost playing for top 8 in both the things, and I didn't watch all of his matches, but it was pretty funny watching. I don't know, something like 8 or 9 games, kind of late in the tournament, where he's either like playing for top 8 or it's the round before or something, and never saw him draw a priest. Never saw him, or like rarely saw him draw like Deadly Dispute, Village Rites, and like chain those together or whatever. So the games I watched were just like so anemic and pathetic, where it's like your hand is like oven, claim, push, shambling ghast or whatever, and then you just try and do something with that, which
Mm-hmm.
you don't really have any good draw steps in the first couple turns, and you're just like, yeah, I guess my turn 4 is buy Gigantha, turn 5 is cast Gigantha or whatever. It's like the deck looks so bad when that's going on, right? So I don't know. I
Yeah. Do
think
you think this was a construction issue or just like a variance issue and you caught the poor end of his draws, or what do you think was going on there?
I think that there's some stuff to do. I mean, I tried to hedge a little bit for control, which maybe you didn't need to do, and things like Ob Nixilis main deck might have been worse than playing a couple fables and just having the additional filtering and whatnot. But it's like
Mm-hmm.
you have a bunch of unlucky witnesses and deadly disputes and village rights and priest also cycles and
Are you max on all those cards?
not max.
Okay.
I mean, I have 4 witness, 4 priest, 3 dispute, 2 village rights,
Okay.
and then for a little bit I had a call of the death dweller too, which could rebuy the
Yep.
priest, but or the witnesses. So I don't know, just from like gold fishing and like the initial playing that we did and stuff, it felt like it was enough, and then there were definitely games where you just like ran out of gas and it was pretty disappointing. So I don't know. In hindsight, there's definitely something to fix there, and the matches that Josh played against Mono Green, it's one of those things where I like specifically call out like the bad scenario, right? It's like if they win the die roll, they're on to play game 1 and they have an elf.
Yep.
That's the bad scenario, right? And that just happened to them both times.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that unlikely, right? It's like, coin
Yeah,
flip,
but
coin flip.
they always have an elf. They basically
Elf
mulligan
is
to an elf. Yeah.
elf is like slightly higher to have it than not. And it's like, okay, they basically won 2 coin flips against him twice, which the more instances of that happening, the stranger it's going to be. But it's like, if they're on the play, if you're on the play and they have an elf, you have a lot of ways to kill it, even outside of like the fatal push stuff, because you
Yep.
can shambling gas sack it to whatever, and you're generally in a pretty good scenario. Or even if they have an elf and you get to play priest and then pass to them, they don't really have good recourse against that either. It's just like
Right.
when specifically you're on the draw. So the mono green matchup is probably closer than I thought it was going to be, and then Phoenix game 1 is pretty bad, but I felt like we made that up in sideboarding.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean overall, I do think that if you're playing against a bunch of like tribal creature decks, human spirits, whatever, Mayhem Devil, Priest of Forgotten Gods are just gonna absolutely crush people. And then I don't know, decks like Control or like Rakdos midrange stuff like that are also pretty easy for the deck because you have a bunch of card advantagey things going on.
Yeah, you just grind it out.
Yep. So it didn't seem that bad to me. Obviously, Lotus Field was the one thing where it's like, yeah, you're probably dead, but there are no Bryans here, so it'll be fine.
There's only one Bryan, and apparently that's true in this metagame as well. So just keep doing your thing. Don't worry about Lotus Field.
See, I think Josh mostly lost to Mono Green and Phoenix, which is not a great place to be, but it's also like you can definitely beat those decks too. It just so happened that was most of the stuff that Josh played against and what the better players were playing and whatnot. So,
Can we talk about Mono Green for a little while?
I mean, if you want to, I don't know what the 10-sided cards do, but I'll
Okay,
do my best.
I think you'll know enough to have some opinion on what's going on with this Mono Green deck. It is. We talked a bit about how like I bought into this deck. You were very skeptical. It sort of fell out of favor for a few weeks, and we saw a lot of like Lifebane zombie hard hate floating around.
Oh yeah. I brought that stuff up to DC. I was like, I don't know if you want Lifebanes or Invoke Despairs or whatever, but we can hate on this deck as much as you want if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I would think about it. I think the deck is actually quite good, quite flexible in how it's able to play games. Like, obviously, it just has these very explosive things, but Karn's a messed up card. Like, it really is. Like, one of the top 10 planeswalkers of all time, very easily, in my opinion. In this format in particular, it really hits this sweet spot of being like just fast enough to matter against everyone. I think like it even is super influential against like Lotus Field, and part of that is like obviously turn one elf that changes things a lot for this card. But this combination of planeswalkers they're putting together is so interesting, and the really interesting one I wanted to talk about are these Bolus Dragon Gods that are now in the deck. And like
No.
the first time I saw this, I was like, "This is utter nonsense. This is a complete lark." The second time I saw it, there were two copies of Bolus Dragon God in the deck, and someone went down much further. And it turns out now people are just like, this is an unshakable, indisputable part of the deck. You always have one. Part of it is that you can use it to enable one of your infinite plans, which is like whatever, I guess. Like, sure. I Do you
I
think
get
this
it.
actually answers a problem for the deck? Like, does this do anything that you couldn't do before?
That's kind of the problem to me, is that it doesn't necessarily fix any problems unless you're talking specifically about, maybe the mirror match.
Yeah, the mirror match is an interesting application for this. Even there, I feel like you could just find better tools if you really wanted to. Like if that's what you were looking for, this can't be like the one best card you could possibly add to answer it. I feel like there's got to be something else you could consider. Yeah, I don't know what to make of this. My first impression was this is a very silly idea. The more people play with this deck, the more they seem to view it as indispensable. And I'm sort of defaulting to the knowledge of people who have played the deck more than I have. But I look at the abilities of this card and I'm like, I don't really fear this whatsoever. I don't know why I would fear this. And basically, it's just being used in some spots to draw your deck alongside the Chain Veil, which is fine. But like, if you're doing that kind of stuff, you can usually figure out a way to win anyway. And
Correct.
I don't know, man. I'm not sold yet, and someone's gonna have to make a more compelling argument to me if they're gonna sell me on this card. I think if you like have the one in your deck, it's probably fine. You probably get away with it. Like you mulligan very well. You do see a lot of cards in general. You see Oath of Nissa many games, so it's probably not going to bite you too many times. I am just not on board with it really solving anything for you either at this point.
Yeah, I think it kind of showed up as memes and definitely had some applications. And people were at first they're like, "This is silly," and then a lot of people got on board with it. And then kind of like my last take on it was that people were just like, "Okay, never mind. Like we're sort of off this." But I could definitely be wrong about that.
Yeah, so mostly looking at results of the two challenges this past weekend. That's all we really have to go on for like quote unquote hard data. And there is a bolus in Bo Matt Courier, actually Bo Matt Courier, a patron of ours, doing very well in these Pioneer challenges with mono green. So we could ask their opinion, see what they think. But there's just not a lot of mono green in this particular sampling of Pioneer challenges. So I can't really make a takeaway. All I know is that when I was looking at lists throughout the last few weeks, I've seen the numbers go up, not down. Like I've seen some people playing two copies, which was wild to me. And almost everyone has one at this point.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not gonna stop you. Live your life.
There you go. Do you remember when this like Oath of Nissa thing to play an off-color planeswalker first showed up?
No.
So I think of it in context of green white tokens, which is really interesting given your relationship with that deck. The first time I ever remember someone doing this,
Was it
think it
Chandra?
was yeah, it was Sir Chandra. I
With
think it was Raf Levy, but I'm
it
not.
was Raph, yeah.
Was it? Yeah, and I remember at the time being like, "This is nonsense. Why would you ever do this?" And then like playing the mirror the first time someone slammed a Chandra against me, I was like, "Oh, okay." I at least get how you get talked into it. Like it makes sense why you wanted to take this lark.
Yeah, I mean, I could do multiple podcasts on green white tokens and have, but I could certainly do it again. And while that is an effective tool in the mirror, it doesn't mesh well with all of the other stuff that you want to be doing. At least the bolus does. Well, like it does mesh with your overall plan and is an additional combo piece in addition to like a disrupting piece. But the Chandra thing was like, yeah, it's like solid in a vacuum, but ultimately you're just trying to like build your board, do some stuff with Evo Leap, eventually cast Tragic Arrogance if you need to. you
Yep.
know? And the Chandra is just like, I guess, a thing you could do in the middle there if you wanted to, but it doesn't necessarily win you the game outright, and it doesn't feed into what your game plan is ultimately going to be. So,
Yeah, it's almost a hedge in and of itself, right? Like its existence is designed to do so many things that you just would be better off in a lot of instances focusing in on the main thing you're trying to do.
yeah, I mean, I see the upside for it, but there are definitely the games where it's like keeping in the small Nissa in those games where it's like,
Hmm.
yeah, if you draw it, it's like an okay card, but it's not contributing to anything.
Right.
And the Chandra sort of does a similar thing, where yeah, maybe there's a specific instance where it ends up being okay, but ultimately you're just going to draw it. And it's going to be like a ham sandwich compared to what you're trying to do. You know, it's like
Yep.
you're playing burn and you draw like an archive trap or something. You're just like, okay, I guess I could mill them out, but like, really, is this going to happen? You know?
Yeah, the example I always like to use is like mental misstep and legacy burn. I remember when that was popular for a long time because it's like, oh, I can interact with my opponents now. And it's like, well, actually, you just gave your opponent the game because that wasn't a burn spell that you could have played and advanced your plan. Like you have to accept when you're playing burn, sometimes you just have to get more burn spells, and it's not about interacting. It's just about doing your main objective as quickly as
Yeah,
possible.
it's like, oh, I have to misstep their misstep, and it's like, well, you could just not draw that on turn 8 or whatever and draw
Yep.
Fire Blast instead. You know?
Yep. Probably be better off.
So yeah, I don't know. I certainly like respect the fact that people are doing it, and as far as things to try, this is not very high up there on like the nonsense scale. Like it's a nonsense card, but it just happens to do a few things that the deck actually wants to do,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But yeah, castable off of just Oath is still very strange to me, and I don't like it.
Scary. It's scary for sure. Okay, that's about as much as I wanted to say about mono green because obviously mono green is now on my shit list for having too many words on its cards. So, is there anything else you saw in your PTQ experience that impressed you in terms of not your deck, things either Josh played against or just trends you saw throughout the weekend that really stood out to you?
It was pretty normal. You know, there were definitely things that showed up a
Open
little bit.
metagame, wide open metagame.
Well, this the stuff that I described, like there was not a ton of humans. There were more spirits than I thought there would be. There was maybe not as much mono green, but you could tell that it was the people who were plugged in online that were playing mono green. Also, the people who were probably able to switch decks or like acquire cards easily
Hmm.
were the ones playing mono green. So, if you were a person who was like, well, I'm just playing like my Pioneer deck or whatever, it's very unlikely that you chose that deck, both because it's like relatively new and also because it's like pretty complicated and weird.
There's always been like some version of mono green though as part of the like it was the first deck of Pioneer, right?
Yes, but also the deck was much different then, right?
Oh, for sure, for sure.
You know,
And
it,
and Nissa deck, and
you have the Planeswalkers from the Festival Cavalier, the Troll, like that's 20 cards different than what it used to be.
yeah, yeah.
Like I've played mono green devotion in standard, pioneer, and modern, and if I tried to build that deck from the cards in my collection, I would fall very short.
No, that's fair. I same exact place as you where I've played Devotion in every single conceivable format, and I had to order a bunch of cards. So I feel you.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, there wasn't a lot of Rakdos Sacrifice, but I think that like Sacrifice was pretty firmly like tier 2, maybe even like tier point 5 kind of stuff, where
Mhm.
it had its niche and it was pretty good at that. And then people were mostly just like, well, this Rakdos mid range deck also kind of cleans up the creature decks and is just like a little bit solid, a little bit more solid against everything else. So we'll just keep doing this. But I don't think people really iterated on the Rakdos Sacrifice decks to the point where instead of you're just updating it with like new people putting Blood Tithe Harvester in their Sacrifice deck. It's like, yeah, that's fine, but you could actually like try and build a cohesive package and get something that's actually just like really good in the metagame. And it doesn't seem like people have really taken those steps. I think that Priest is like a pretty obvious solution for a lot of this stuff.
Right there with you. You mentioned red black mid range and people moving to that. If you look at Pioneer Challenge results from this weekend, so we have 4 top slots. 3 of them are claimed by red black mid range. First and second in the Saturday event, and then first in the Sunday event. Seems to be the top deck right now. This is a deck that like is pretty far outside the range of what I want to play in a format like this. It needs to be sort of tailored towards what you expect. But I've been thinking about it a bit more, and I don't think this is as bad of a mid-range deck as it appears to be on its face at first blush, because basically every single card in this deck is 2 cards, if not more. So we start with Chandra, which obviously 4 modes: removal spell, card advantage, ramp, whatever it wants to do. Blood Tithe Harvester, a 3/2 that's also removal. Graveyard Trespasser, Graveyard Hate, plus persistent damage. Kalitas, same type of setup. Kroxa, discard, plus direct damage, plus huge body, plus recursive threat, all tacked on. Then we have our removal spells, but even there, something like Cut to Ribbon showing up, which functions as both removal spell and direct damage. Bone Crusher Giant is just 2 cards stapled together. Unlicensed Hearse is your Graveyard Hate, as well as a source of damage. And then Fable of the Mirror Breaker, again, one of those cards that just kind of does a little bit of everything. Threat,
Yeah.
ramp, card drawing. And when you start to look at it that way, you're just like, well, if all of my cards can do everything, then mid-range actually makes sense. You're not dealing with traditional mid-range problems where you are doing one thing in one game and another thing in another game. You just get to choose what thing you do all the time. And I think that it's so key for this deck's success. And it's also working out in its favor that one of the big things pushing me away from this deck is I felt like it could be completely fine, but you have to kind of gin it. Like, you have to have the right setup. You need to know exactly what sideboard slots you need to dedicate towards what matchups. And that was just not a position I was ever going to be in for this Pioneer season. So I didn't want to go ahead and try and do that. I don't think it's as bad as I made it out to be. There is still some of that. You certainly, the right number of Lifebane zombies and go blanks and all of that stuff is going to be very, very important. But the modality of all these cards is covering up a lot of typical mid-range weaknesses. And I am mostly a believer at this point. Again, I don't think it's the right deck for me. I think it's one of those decks, though, that it's really good at letting better players beat up on less experienced players, because you do have that decision-making ability. You are able to shape the games in the way you want. And it's just like pretty consistent too. With all your cards doing multiple things, you generally get to sculpt your hand and participate in every game. So that's a really nice place to be for a season where you're trying to kind of exploit some skill differentials.
The thing that I don't like about this deck, and isn't necessarily a large problem, but certainly could be a problem, and is the way I bet you lose a lot of your games, is just falling behind on mana usage effectively, where it's the same thing with like mono green being on the play with an elf or whatever, and they play like a troll into like a Kiora and another spell into like Karn and another spell, and you're just like, oh, dread bore that or whatever.
Yeah,
You
the
just
catch-up mechanisms are not there.
right, and you're playing everything on your face. Like, yeah, your cards are modal, but you have to spend like 2 or 3 or 4 mana for all of your stuff, and you're getting decent rates. But if your opponent has a good draw and they're doing the stuff with like the really good rates, you are probably just going to fall behind. And yeah, no way to really come back from that outside of, you make some of that stuff up in the sideboard with like Lifebane, Invoke Despair, whatever. But that's my big issue. But it shouldn't really happen all that much. And like I said, you can sideboard around it for sure.
Yeah, I think also people are opting out of doing the things that get those ridiculous returns on rates. Like, we're talking about people refusing to show up with Lotus Field. I mean, I'll play Lotus Field into this deck all day. And yes,
Yeah,
of course. They have their Thoughtseize, they have their Duress, they have their Go Blank. Those are nice tools. I'm not saying you walk all over this deck, but you're still very happy to play it, and you will win more games than you lose, even if it's only slightly in Lotus Field's favor. I still am quite sure it is in Lotus Field's favor, but people just aren't doing those types of things. They're not putting you in the grinder. And if we look at this, this body of these 2 tournaments, there's only a few decks that I would classify as like really trying to sidestep the type of stuff that these mid-range decks are very good at answering. So things like Phoenix are very much participating in this game, this resource game, where they're trying to accumulate a graveyard and, they're trying to eke out advantages. I believe Rakdos can crush those type of setups. Things like Spirits, they're not particularly fast. They're not snowballing the game. They're not making those huge plays. They're just eking a little value here or there. I mean, theoretically, there's collected company, but we know that card just misses all the time anyway. So that's not going to get you ahead. And that's really even if you want to pretend like it does something, that's the only tool you have to really pull ahead like that and get that mana advantage.
No, I would want to focus on Curious Obsession and Geistlight Snare.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And that's one of the reasons why I've said throughout, I think the mono blue setup is a little bit better because you can do things like that and you can just go ahead and snowball the game really hard on these mid-range decks and possibly find an advantage that way. So I think the reason this deck is having so much success has a few very, very good reasons. There's the fact that it is just a well-constructed deck. It does a bunch of things really well. I also just think people are kind of letting it run free and are content saying like, no, I can beat this deck and really not giving it the respect it deserves. I think the metagame is going to have to shift around red black. I don't think you're going to be able to like force it out with your sideboard choices or your deck construction choices. I think it's got to be actual deck selection, and it's got to be some of these bigger hammers that swing really hard at these type of strategies.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, if there were more control decks, like bigger control decks, I think if it's blue white and they're just trying to like wanderer and trade fairly, I can see how the Rakdos deck would win or whatever. But if you're playing like a super hard control deck where you go really big, then I think Rakdos is probably just going to have like too many dead cards, not enough of a clock, whatever, and it's going to be pretty tough for them. But those kind of decks would need to be good in the metagame, and it's getting to the point where it is now because of the prevalence of Rakdos. Or, Rakdos is a thing now, and maybe stuff like Lotus Field can come out to play, because when these decks started, they had like the Epic Spheres or moons in the sideboard, and I see, the occasional Alpine moon.
Yeah.
But they're definitely
not
just
what
like,
it was.
They're definitely just like, there's not much Lotus Field. How much do we actually have to care about this? Probably not at all.
Yeah.
And it's time to get punished.
I think so. It was really interesting too to mention, like you were describing how the control decks aren't really doing a good job of going over the top, but obviously like Urian control decks exist, right? There are tools in this format to do Fires of Invention Urian type setups where you're just absolutely massive, but they're not choosing to do things like that, and maybe correctly so for like the broader metagame. But as soon as the focus comes on this very fair mode of Rakdos, I do think you can start to look towards those type of strategies again and just absolutely bury them in endless advantage. And they can't keep up with things like a Yuri and, generating 4 or 5 cards worth of value. It's just not realistic.
Yeah, where's the enigmatic incarnation deck? Oh, here we go. 11th place.
Yep.
On 730.
Yep. Yeah, this is a really good example of exactly how the format could start to shift to punish these. And there's also there's something in 3rd place in the other event, like the Titan of Industry Transmogrify deck, which is a little bit more vulnerable. Like these decks obviously do a pretty good job of interacting with creatures at instant speed, but still eventually there is like a large enough setup where this can just go over the top and maybe blow something up. So I think things like that are interesting as well.
Yeah, a person at one of the PTQs had me look at their deck, and it was pretty similar to this, and we got to talk about it a little bit. It was pretty interesting. But
yeah, it is interesting.
Yeah, they started with like Fires Urian from Nassif, I think is who they mentioned.
Okay.
But it was like the same kind of deal. And I don't know. I tried some of this. Obviously, it's different, but I tried some of this stuff in Explorer, and then you play against the Rakdos decks that just have a bunch of fatal pushes and stuff, and it's just like, their bad removal spells are actually kind of live against you.
Mm.
Yeah, I think Fires is very good, very underplayed, and I honestly did not expect to see an enigmatic incarnation deck in the thing, but then I was like, I think it's probably a good time for that, and I scrolled down, it's like, oh, there it is. Okay, cool.
Yep. Yeah. I quite like these strategies. I played them a bit in Standard when it was viable, and it's just Urian stuff. It just absolutely snowballs advantages and goes over the top of everything, and you see like, particularly this list, hard dedication to Yuri and strategies, things like Yerrick the Desecrated in the list, and you can just go absolutely off. And it's not something we mentioned how like Rakdos has to control the snowball, and they do have good tools for doing it. That's the things they're never going to have just these like get completely blown up matchups. It's the Jund thing all over again, where if you're thought season and clocking really well, you're not going to have to face that type of thing. And people really like having that level of agency over their PTQ results. So it's very clear that this should be a popular deck, especially on Magic Online. Like that's the type of player who really wants to be playing this type of thing. So maybe it's still a little underrepresented live, I would say, because I agree with you. My anecdotal experience was not a ton of this deck around, and maybe there should be more of it. So it could be a little soon if you're trying to make like something bordering on a harder read where you're trying to target this deck a little bit. I don't think we're at that stage yet, especially in the IRL metagame. Maybe online, but I would pump the brakes a little bit if you're headed to an RCQ this weekend.
Yeah, IRL is a little tough because, like I noted, you can kind of get a sense for what is happening in the area or what happened on a particular day, but then the next day is at a different store on a different side of the state or whatever, and not all the same people are going to be there, right? So it is really difficult to pin this stuff down. And I think
Yep.
that although this is more of like a soft read than a hard read with playing anti-creature Rakdos Sacrifice, because there are still just like a lot of creature decks, I think that maybe it was focusing a little bit too much on one thing, and also was not doing as good of a job as something like Phoenix or Rakdos Midrange or the Mono Green Devotion deck, where you can just get carried some amount of times based on power,
Yep.
right? Whereas the Sacrifice deck had 12 1 mana 1/1s. And granted, those cards do stuff, right?
Yep.
But you're not going to be blowing people out of the water very often with those cards. And those were definitely the games where Josh was struggling, was when he was a little bit more anemic and looking for spots to gain favorable trades, but it wasn't like your opponent was playing like Kithian or Dauntless Bodyguard or whatever, where you just automatically got to make those things happen. So things could have been a little bit different if you just, playing Phoenix and cashing Treasure Cruise and having a fistful of cards, or making 15 mana with Devotion and stuff. So in a way, kind of just making it harder on him too, for basically no reason. So I think it was worth the experiments, because I did feel like it was time to maybe cash in on some of that. And if there
Mm-hmm.
was a time to play a metagame deck, then it would have been then. And I had a good idea for what it could be. But I kind of cautioned against it before we started all this, where it's just like, that's probably not a good thing to be doing. And sure enough.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough making that type of call, and then you'll always second guess. Just be like, well, why didn't I just play the dummy deck and get these powerful wins out of nowhere? I guess at this point, there's always next week. It sounds like, particularly in Josh's area, he has access to unlimited PTQs and can just go play as much as he wants. So, not a bad spot to be in. I don't know. There's some interesting discussion this week about like the state of PTQs, and now you've been to a lot. 5 total you've attended at this point?
Mm,
4?
we definitely did the 2 modern and the 2 pioneer. Oh, and then Josh went to one that was small store, small cap, was capped. And so he could have like gotten on the list, but he was just like, no, this place is like too cramped and
Yep.
whatever. I'm just gonna leave. Which,
Yep.
great decision.
Yeah, I feel that 100%. All right. So, like, 4 or 5 PTQs in, what's kind of your review of the way things are going thus far? How has your experience been? How has have the stores seemed prepared? What's the judging been like? That's been the hot topic of discussion this week.
Yeah, I mean, all the events have had one judge that I could tell.
And a capable judge, or
Yeah.
okay.
So I think that that's been okay. And I don't know, man. You also shared the thing from your PTQ where the TO, didn't check a box or check the wrong box or whatever, and it didn't pair the top 8 by seed, and then y'all just like took over and were like, we're fixing it. We're just gonna
Yep.
run it this way. And I feel like a lot of that stuff could happen, right? Like, especially in the later rounds of the tournament where the players have just been doing this stuff for so long. Like it doesn't take a lot to actually run the event post pairings and hope that nothing comes up and nothing happens, right? But like obviously you feel so much better as a player having a good judge there, right?
Do you think
So
there should be a requirement to have a judge there?
yeah, I mean I do, but it's so bad. It's like the store gets charged for the kits, and then they have to pay someone else, and then they don't have the best prize support or whatever because they're already in the hole, and then the players complain. It's just like, god damn. why can't we just make this a little bit easier on them? Like, they are definitely providing a service and are trying to make money. They are a business. Like, I'm not going to support them being like really underhanded and greedy and stuff like that, but it's not like that, you know?
Yeah, I think PTQs should cost quite a bit more than they do, frankly. I mean, I think that's the only way to really make them sustainable and make it something that stores are going to be interested in. And I know that sucks. Like, I trust me, I want everyone to be able to play cheap PTQs. I,
You know what? If your event is capping, you probably should have charged more.
yeah, I think even in cases where it doesn't cap, like I mentioned my PTQ was $10, right?
Yeah.
I think every single person in that room was coming if it was $20. I think there's a good chance they show up if it's 25, maybe at 30. You lose one,
Yeah,
two
and
people.
this is not about greed. This is about like fair market price and what people are willing to pay without
Right.
feeling exploited. And then also you do stuff like that and you can increase the prize pool and it
You
doesn't
can
have to like all go to the store's pockets or
you can
whatever.
pay a
But
judge. I mean,
yeah,
that's the thing that I
or
really come back to is for me, the $30 expense versus a $10 expense would be entirely worth it just knowing a judge would be there, a
yes.
good, well trained judge.
Yeah, I didn't really think about that because our events all had a judge, right? So
Yeah.
that was getting handled. I don't know if the store was happy or the judge was happy or what the arrangement was or whatever, but I hope that that's the case. But yeah, for your event to not have a judge and be $10, it's like this doesn't make sense.
No, it does not. And obviously, it presented itself as a very real problem in a very real way in Brazil this past week. So I,
What happens?
I, look, I'm not going to give the details just because I don't want to misquote anything.
Okay.
The story's out there for people to look at. Very well known Magic Online grinder seemingly
Okay.
influenced a judge to make a very, very ridiculous judge call. Was subsequently dropped by his team slash publishing place after it was found out about. So you can go find the controversy. I don't want to rehash it all here, but it's not going to be an isolated incident. Like, it's going to be something that comes up a bunch, and you have to make these events welcoming for all these new players that we've added. Like, they have to be enjoyable. They have to be, and this is why I like got so mad about the people who are just kind of like being obnoxious at a PTQ. Like, are you happy here? Do you want these things to happen? Because if you do, you need to welcome new people in, and you need to make it a place where people want to be. And if you have cheating problems and judging problems and attitude problems and generally unwelcoming environments, it's just not going to happen. It's not going to last. This tournament structure is not going to be able to succeed. And it's kind of already got a bunch of things stacked against it. It sounds like things in Europe are not going particularly well. It sounds like the large events in particular are really, really struggling there, and people are not happy with anything, really anything. I haven't heard anything good about what's going on in Europe. So yeah, there's some problems right now, and I think it is important for both the community and the people running these events to think about how to solve them and what their role is in sort of addressing them. And I think some of that is just like, we might have to be prepared to take some higher prices on the chin. You might have to be prepared to not be a jerk. I know that's a big ask for a lot of people, but it's what's going to take for the system to work.
I know that different people respond differently to stimuli, right?
Of
And
course.
for the people being jerks at the PTQs, I definitely want to say something to them to the effect of like, hey, this is not okay, or this is a punishment or a slight embarrassment or something that will maybe cause you to rethink your decisions. And generally I lead with like talking to them potentially, but
Mhm.
doesn't always work. If someone is already kind of like in that space, it is probably because they have been talked to before and it has not worked. So I don't know. I want that stuff to get handled over time, and I think that with maybe negative reinforcement or whatever, it could get there, but it's hard because you don't know exactly what is going to work best on someone.
That's true. That's true. I can look back my own experience. I actually remember Josh one time pulled me aside, something I did, and was like, I didn't really like that you did that. And I listened to him and thought about it, and then ultimately was like, you were right. I shouldn't have done that. That was dumb.
Hmm.
And then I apologized for it. I am grateful he took the time to tell me that and was comfortable enough to tell me that. Like that was worth a lot to me. But you're right. Most people, I won't say most people, a lot of people wouldn't respond that way. A lot of people would be defensive or double down on their behavior and
Yeah.
make it even worse. I mean, is it something you've seen on your end too? I know I was the one sharing the story last week, but have you seen some of that behavior as well?
Not as much, like not as bad. I think,
Okay.
maybe it's the crew of people who are aware of the PTQs or the people that I'm within earshot of their conversations of or whatever, just like Alex Modulton, Tommy Ashton, those sorts of people who are just 10 plus year
Yep.
veterans of the game with
Yep.
multiple pro tour appearances. It's just like they're not going to be like that, right? And for the most part, all the people that have come up to me and been like, hey, like your podcast or whatever, and then we talk about something to do with the event or their deck or what, like all of those people have been really nice, and I
Yep.
haven't heard too
Agree.
much in the way of like, oh, this person sucks. So I
That's
think
good.
I'm just running good, pretty fortunate.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I look, I've heard other people say similar things, and a lot of people having a really great time. And I'm stoked to hear that. I'm glad a lot of these events are going pretty well. Certainly a mixed bag. I don't want to paint a doom and gloom scenario, but I think they could be better in a lot of spots, and I think they will get better if we keep working on it. So
The problems that I see so far is that it's hard to find a schedule, and like we knew that these events were coming down the pipeline for a while, and then it was just like, oh, the schedule went up, they're happening next month,
yeah,
and then you just suddenly have to plan for 8 weeks of stuff.
it's a
And
long season, man. It's a real
yeah,
long
and the
season.
schedule is not complete, so just
Yep.
occasionally there are like random things popping up on the schedule that weren't there before, and so it's just weird. And the stores have not been super great at advertising their stuff, which I don't know what a store is supposed to be focusing on. Like, does it really matter if your website is constantly updated? Like, are people really checking that, or should you be focused on like your newsletter or your Facebook page more or
Yeah,
whatever?
I
Like,
don't have an answer for that.
or is it just you're relying on like local word of mouth or something? But I don't know. You go on the website and it's like they're on the schedule. Maybe they're not on the website, or maybe it's just like here, go to our Facebook page. It's like I don't have Facebook anymore. Like what the hell, you know? But then the Wizards website and their website say that there are different start times or different entry fees, and
Yeah, I've seen that. Yep.
it's just stuff like that where it's like I don't really like this. I wish that it was done a little bit better. I wish that there was a more centralized hub with this information, or even like the Wizards event locator has a lot of information about the event, but it's generally just like kind of nonsense, right? It's like, oh, come into this store and play modern. And it's just like, you don't need to write out the words with a descriptor, right?
Right.
Just like,
Standardized form will get the job done.
right. Like cost, date, start time, format, maybe prizes if there's room for it or whatever, like location, what the cap is, just that stuff, right? That's all you need.
Look, I know a lot of people who want to like find their in to magic content and find their niche and find their way to get on people's radar. Kids out there are probably too young for
Yep.
mtgmom.com,
Yep.
but mtg mom run her name is escaping me right now. Who was the
Megan
person who
Holland.
ran? Yeah, did an incredible job forever, basically taking the entire PTQ schedule, just putting it on a calendar, and letting the entire world be able to see what events were coming. Maybe it was like US focused, but everyone I knew was just like, if you need to know what's going on, you go to mtgmom.com and you'll know exactly what the schedule is. Certainly an opportunity for someone out there if you want to make a brand to just get all this information, comb through the complexities of the Wizard Store locator, and put it all in a readily accessible form, searchable, laid out in a calendar, and you will get people to your website. I promise you.
Well, Anderson Leclerc was pretty serious about this PTQ season, and when the stuff got posted, he made a Google sheet for all the events that he was thinking about going to. And I was just like, yeah, send me the link to that so I don't have to do the work, you know? So I kind of had like my own thing.
And
He's like,
there's other stuff like that going on. Like
yeah,
people have sent me spreadsheets that are like, here's the ones in my area, and the area like Pika sent me one for the tournaments he was going to, but are just kind of like a little bit outside of my range and not covering some of the other places on my range.
yeah.
So
So you see like the mass focused ones or whatever,
yep,
but yeah.
yep.
So for Anderson's like east of me, right? And then I was talking about going up to DC where, I have reason to go up there because Joe lives there, but like maybe Anderson doesn't want to go up there because it's a little bit further than he would like to travel or whatever. So yeah, I see Anderson's thing, which is pretty good and fairly encompassing for me, but then there's also like the entirety of Maryland that I need to look into. So
Yep.
yeah, it is definitely not perfect. We have ways to figure out things for maybe our own area or backpack off of someone else's work, but if there was just a better way to do it, it would just be so nice. And it would be great if Wizards invested in that, but I understand why they don't. What's the return? Nothing. Are people going to go to the events? Did the stores already buy the kits from them? Yes. So why should they care?
I do not have answers to that question anymore because all evidence points to the fact that they should not care based on how much money they're making. So keep doing you, Wizards. Enjoy those dollars.
Yeah, but I don't know, man. Especially after like pandemic shutdowns and stuff like that. Like I realized that Magic still sold pretty well, but not all stores were, 100% reliant on Magic or whatever, and they still lost whatever like foot traffic and just so many other things, right? Like the stores almost certainly did not do well when
Oh,
things were
sure, but
shut down.
they don't give a shit about the stores like that. That
I
doesn't
know,
matter.
but they should. That's kind of the point that I'm getting to is like, all right, so you have these guidelines in place for what is, WPN, WPN premium, blah blah blah, and then it's like you reach this certain threshold and like now we will allow you to buy a PTQ kit from us. It's like really just give it to them.
I don't know, man.
Like
I
why
really
are
don't.
you nickel and diming a store for like $100 when you're $1 billion corporation? I just don't get it.
Well, I guess what they're actually doing is like nickel and diming the people they contracted to, and obviously, like most time, those contracts will go to the lowest bidder. And the way these lowest bidders are making their money for their involvement in the scenario, which may or may not be a lot of money, I honestly have no idea. Like
Yeah.
anecdotally, I know I was always told when CFB like picked up the GPs that they lost a shit ton of money doing that. Anecdotally, I don't know if that's true or not, so don't quote me on that. But if it was true, then that kind of goes against the idea of, oh, just raking in money hand over fist. I mean, maybe DreamHack is taking a bath on trying to run these tournaments thus far. I have no idea. If that's the case, though, you can understand why all this nickel and diming is going on.
For DreamHack, it's weird though because they have this big convention center thing that they were already going to be doing anyway. So how much does that sliver of space cost you in the grand scheme of things? And it is probably a lot. It's not like, oh yeah, we just have the extra space, whatever. And you got to imagine that anything that is on the floor is bringing them in a bunch of money. So then if they're taking the Magic stuff on themselves, like that's someone else who could have been paying for your show space. So I don't know, but it does seem like so small compared to the rest of their organization that yes, if they are hemorrhaging like a little bit of money just to do Magic specifically, it's probably not that much. It's not definitely not going to make or break them versus like
It's not, but the way that's going to work is like there's going to be a section of the company that's in charge of the Magic portion, and they're going to be asked to make money, and the
oh
people
yeah,
in
and then
charge of that section are going to have
and then
basically their asses on the line
everyone
all the
else in the
time.
company is going to try and like railroad the Magic portion or whatever. Or just be like,
Yeah,
yo, did you guys quit that yet or
right. That's just how these things go when you're dealing with like large companies, and it's a lot of what influences Wizards' decision making as part of Hasbro. And if a company's ever doing like more than one thing, it's never as clear cut as you would expect it to be. Like there's always internal politics and
yeah.
profit allocation going on. So it's worth keeping sight of that when you're pondering these things.
Yeah, I mean outside of the minutia, the details, the specifics for the stores and the PTQs and stuff. My main thought is just that Wizards could do so much more to help stores that would cost them very little and then they just don't. It's not like they do zero, right? Like they do some things, but it's definitely not as much as they could be doing. And I think that especially now they probably have less reason to actually care and to try and keep stores afloat. Whereas before, I think they believed that they needed the stores, and I think we talked about this before, where it's like,
Yeah.
if they're just moving a bunch of stuff on Amazon, then they have way less reason to actually care. But I wish they would.
Me too. Me too.
Whatever. End of the day, Pioneer, play a busted deck. You are not going to have as good of matchups as something like 4-color in Modern, for example, but think that you're going to get some free wins, and even your bad matchups are probably not that bad. And
Yep.
then just the power level of the deck is going to carry you, and I think that that's worth so much more than metagaming and trying to be cute, whatever. And then
Agreed.
yeah, for Modern, I would still play 4-color, but I think that there are merits to exploring, blue red and different versions of it, and trying to figure out what the best thing to be doing there is. Or I don't know. It's so funny because like we went to these Modern PTQs and there was just no living end, like no Cascade at all, really. I think the Cascade deck that I saw was the Glimpse one, and then
Interesting.
watch Josh play a league on Magic Online. He plays against Living End 3 times in one league or whatever. It's like, damn.
Yeah, different worlds for sure. For my end, if I was playing Modern, 4-color or Titan, just based on historical precedent and me thinking that deck is still completely fine.
Amulet just did well this weekend. There was a energy event.
Yep. Yeah, it always remains a reasonable choice if you have your experience in and like what you're tweaking against. So can't really go wrong with that. On the Pioneer side, I still believe in Lotus Field. I still think mono green is a really strong choice. That can change really quickly if people decide they're sick of it. So be aware of that. And I think you're totally justified if you think you have a skill edge and you are very in tune with the metagame, know your sideboard plans really well. I think Rakdos midrange is also a very good choice.
And I think a lot of what you said for Rakdos is true of Phoenix too.
Yeah, definitely very much in the same vein. Good point.
Yeah, I didn't see a lot of Lifebane zombies, but it's just one of those things where, the more PTQs go on, the more mono green shows up, the more winning it does. People just get sick of it, and then you just start seeing like Lifebane zombies sold out at this store or whatever.
Yep.
It's like, oh no.
Yeah. It's weird though, like it's not the be all end all against mono green. Like
no, it's not. It's just good.
Like very zombie proof in a lot of ways. But yeah, I wouldn't want to play against it for 10 rounds. There'd be kind of a nightmare.
It's Lifebane zombie on top of like Thoughtseize and the removal. It is more about just like restricting your resources while actually clocking you, and it does attack planeswalkers.
It's another 2 cards in one, right? Like you're splitting the card in half again, but like very efficiently and on both sides.
Yeah, and then Invoke Despair is just a pretty good cleanup card.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that plan. I think it's good. If you expect a bunch of mono green, by all means do that. I don't think we're in the old standard world where you consider main decking Lifebane Zombie or anything like that, especially in these smaller events. But if you want to hammer the green decks in the sideboarding games, you definitely could do that. I brought a bunch of like Lifebane Zombies, self-inflicted wounds, like whatever, just in case we had an inkling that maybe this was something we would need to do or whatever, but did not come to fruition. So
game.
GG.
Good luck.